Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us. As we have found in doing these, Calandra and I kind of learned over the COVID and since then that we have a number of folks that join us a little bit late. And what we have also found is you that are with us this morning are kind of like the live studio audience, since we record it and end up being that another 100 to 150 folks end up watching this on their own. So those who have gotten up this morning and gotten a cup of coffee to join us, thank you. And we're expecting another 20, 25 folks to jump in, Calandra. But let me go ahead and get going. I'm Richard Seeline with the Resilience Innovation Hub. We have determined that in our town hall of updating folks on our ecosystem, which I'll remind some of you in a minute or two, that there's been increasing interest for us to do a deeper dive on the Resilience Data Exchange and, most importantly, this Resilience Insights Toolkit. We also held in February a roundtable in Washington, D.C. with 55 insurance, real estate, community leaders to talk about the community disaster resilient zone. And it became pretty evident to Calandra and I that the way to move this next iteration of investing in communities for resilience was going to, of course, be driven by having lots of accurate data down to the census tract if we could. So for that purpose, we wanted to provide you all and others this opportunity to hear from Calandra and myself about what is underway in launching the Resilience Insights Toolkit, and to invite you all to participate not only as end users, but as Calandra will discuss about how to bring some of your own data to the table. We have established now, finished in a sense, putting all the pieces together last year, and have moved into 2023 as kind of our quote unquote year of implementation, this national ecosystem. And increasingly there's been interest for us to globalize this to some other parts of the world that have similar interest around this idea of future proofing. But as you can see, we have put at the heart of all of this belief that if we can focus technology, equipment, data, and alternative investment in some very powerful ways, we can measurably reduce risk to communities from different types of natural, man-made, and even operational cyber threats. So putting all of these elements into alignment has really been focused on this concept of changing the delta around risk mitigation, favorably driven also by the work of Wharton up at University of Pennsylvania, a report that McKinsey did for the mortgage bankers, the national academies, all looking along with insurance, reinsurance, federal government, state agencies, this belief that if we can target different types of resources, different types of capital stacks, so to speak, in ways that are focused on what you can put on, in, and around existing infrastructure, so-called retrofit, but also how we design the future of our communities, our infrastructure, our facilities, that we could measurably show a reduction in loss of life, loss of operations, loss of infrastructure and assets, and frankly, loss of communities. And so this idea of a 1 to 6 or better cost benefit, we believe, and I think you all would as well, believe that there are now a lot of data modeling and data tools that can be brought to bear for key decision makers, not just investors, not just developers, not just elected and appointed officials, But if we are going to establish some baseline standard by which we as a nation in our communities will achieve a new standard for resilience, again, the so-called future-proofing America, that we're going to have to bring a lot of great brains, great brain power, and data insight into alignment. So we originally had formed the Resilience Data Exchange about 18 months ago, and have been working with a number of our strategic partners at different universities and across different organizations. And so at the point of reaching a agreement with Calandra, we decided that now was the time to really move this into a platform. And so this idea of a resilience toolkit, which again, Calandra will go deeper into, we've launched it, we're moving forward with it, and today is an opportunity for you all to learn a little bit more about it, give us some thoughts and ideas, and figure out how we can collaborate. One way that we want to move this forward is leveraging the recently bipartisan supported in the White House sign-off on the Community Disaster Resilient Zone Act, which distinguishes most at risk, meaning disaster vulnerability, and most in need, social vulnerability, across hundreds, if not thousands, of census tracts that will be designated by FEMA in the White House, working on a whole of government approach across the 15, 18 major federal agencies and departments. At the same time, as Calandra and I have had an opportunity to explore, there's so much work being done by the private and philanthropic sectors that we see this resilience toolkit as really the best of bringing private, public, philanthropic information, data, and end users together. This is a busy slide. You'll get a copy of the text, so I am not going to read all of these. For the love of God, thank you, Calandra. But it's to give you an idea that there really is this twofold approach to how we're looking at the use of the data. First and foremost, citizens, communities, small businesses, and companies who are steep into their localities that are being threatened by these different various disasters. And then the bottom set is really looking at the different types of investors. So our feeling was, could we connect data, and not just data for the collection of data, but meaningful, powerful, and most importantly, actionable data into a way that served both, the demand and the supply, or in this case, folks that are building out and trying to make their communities thrive, not just survive, and connect the dots again with investors, whether it's, public grants or philanthropic, gifts and roles of new types of donors. So with that, as kind of a setup, I want to turn the bulk of this over to Calandra. Calandra, I'll serve kind of as your AV, and then I'll stop sharing when you're ready to go live. But Calandra Cruikshank is seriously one of the smartest people that I've met in the data world, because she always focuses on how the end user is going to benefit. There's a lot of us that see a significant amount of data. Sometimes it's cute, sometimes it's informative, but Calandra is really stuck to the point of making data actionable. So I am so fortunate to have her as a partner. Calandra, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I think your last point is the most important, with bringing that those actionable insights to the forefront. And it used to be this mad rush of how can we get data? How do we get our hands on all of this data? And today it's more like we have such a huge glut of data. How do we understand what it's telling us, and how do we make it actionable and easy to absorb and easy to get the insights out that you need for data-driven decisioning? So with that, let me run, if you go to the next slide, we can run through a little introduction about Statebook, which is my company, and what we have done over the last 10 years or so is aggregate initially large amounts of federal data for the entire US down to the census tract and block group level. So we aggregate data from the census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics with workforce, wage rate, employment data, et cetera. We go into great detail with the Departments of Education, Health, Housing, Transportation, Energy, the Tax Foundation, NOAA weather data, most recently FEMA, National Risk Index, and other tools. So we aggregate all of that data, we normalize it not just across disparate data sets, but also across geographies for the entire US and across time, so that it's all able to be trended and learn from history, so we're not doomed to repeat it, right? And we deliver our data through a variety of ways, starting with the Statebook Platform, which is a platform created for corporate site selection and economic development. And then we have a whole series of application programming interfaces or APIs that allow companies and others to license our data to build into their own platforms. And most recently, we've been very focused with Richard on resilience and putting forth solutions specifically for resilience and natural disaster risk. So if you go ahead to the next slide, Richard. So this is just the Statebook platform, and you can skip to the next one. Just different ways that our data can be configured and spun up for custom insights. Go ahead. And one of the things that led to Richard and I partnering is the fact that at the onset of COVID, we were working with a number of different communities that needed to update their comprehensive economic development strategy reports, which for those of you who don't know, every community, every region across the United States is required to submit these very comprehensive reports that combine not only research and SWOT analysis to understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats across the region, but also consensus amongst all of the stakeholders in the community, from businesses to universities to utilities to you name it. They have all of the different stakeholders at the table, and the economic development organizations drive this. It takes them about a year to put these things together. And of course, nobody had planned for a pandemic. So they had, in order to qualify for federal COVID recovery funding, they had to update their SEDS reports. And so we realized we could embed our data, we could digitize these reports with always updated interactive data and turn them into, as many communities told us, a beautiful PDF report that becomes a paperweight on everybody's desk for 5 years, and transform it into an interactive digital data-driven resource for each community and all of their stakeholders. And as part of that project, in the more recent year or two, the Federal Economic Development Administration has implemented a focus, specifically a requirement specifically around resilience, understanding that in order to ensure quality of life, ensure business continuity, ensure economic growth in all of the regions across the country, resilience has to be front and foremost in everybody's mind as they're developing these economic development strategies. So this journey into resilience kind of started with our digital SEDS platform. And if you kind of skip to the next slide.
Yeah, let me emphasize something, Calandra, and that is, I think as you and I both have found out, that even though under the U.S. Department of Commerce, EDA requires the SEDS report, that a lot of other federal agencies now look to the SEDS as an underpinning. So HUD, Department of Energy is using it or referring to it. I think it's important for you all to recognize that by having this digital SEDS as kind of a baseline of thousands upon thousands of different data points for any community, it gives them a jump start on being able to go to what Calandra is going to show you, but to also reemphasize that some of you may be aware that through the Department of Commerce and the Economic Development Administration, over $2-something billion went out, during COVID, post-COVID, but also has been aligned with the various presidential declarations on these disasters. So I cannot emphasize enough, Calandra, the significant power of having the digital SEDS be a base on which all of you can work and help your customers, help work with these communities as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so as a introduction to the work that Richard and I are doing together, we are building this resilience data exchange, whereby we start with the foundation of Statebook data, which is that earlier slide of 32 billion data points, and start building on that to integrate additional partners' data, additional data into Statebook, the Statebook database itself, and start creating this resilience data exchange that can be a valuable resource for anybody that is looking to understand the risk, whether it's insurance agencies or developers or real estate developers or economic developers. So many different players at the table that this impacts. And I think, Richard, to your point, they are now saying that the amount of money that is coming down for economic development and specifically for resilience as a piece of that, and even when it's not a piece of that, it's still front and center as a requirement for the economic development funding that's coming down now from all the different agencies you just mentioned. There's been nothing like this seen in the US since like the New Deal. So it is an extraordinary moment in time to reinvent, reshape how we are doing economic development, how we're building our communities, how resilient are they, and are we making the right investments in the right places? And so that is what the Resilience Data Exchange is meant to power. So if you go to the next slide. So what we've done is we've partnered with a number of different groups. We've brought into the Statebook database the FEMA National Risk Index. We've brought in Department of Homeland Security data, NOAA data, and partner data like Climate Alpha, which is the data that you see there on the right-hand side, with climate risks being measured against different types of scenarios, business as usual, optimistic and pessimistic scenarios to measure and forecast the risk for flood, fire, and other natural disasters. So that's just some examples of the data and the way that we're able to pull it all together in one platform, which we'll show you live in a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
And I think, Calandra, the point is, this is not just looking at historic, current, and projected, but it's also giving you all an opportunity to look at various scenarios and play some what ifs. That goes to this idea that if we choose to have certain kinds of interventions, technical, nature-based, physical infrastructure, what will those scenarios play out? I think that's critical here, that this is not just looking at data in those kinds of historical, current, projected, but giving you an opportunity to do some what ifs.
Absolutely. So here we're just showing that we have one of the tools that we also integrated in here is the FEMA's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. again, down to the census tract, to be able to inform some of that decisioning around the economic development resilience zones that are going to be identified shortly. And then we also partnered with Global Impact, Howard Buffett's company, to integrate his impact potential scores, which enable investors to see and understand at a glance at the census tract level what is the impact that their investment can have against things like, in a community, against things like affordable housing, poverty, unemployment, diversity, health, access to healthcare and education, and so forth. So here on the right, you can see some of the sample risk factors that we're able to measure, and then using the impact potential score and Global Impact's IRR, impact rate of return, is also being built into the platform so that we can measure that impact over time and really understand what the impacts are and what the deliverables have been based on different investments.
And this gives us really great, again, insight of whether it's private, public, or philanthropic types of resources being allocated. Can we also look at what are the potential reductions in not just risk, but also this reduction in social vulnerability, which goes to this idea of that we want communities that are thriving, not just surviving. We can, do all that we can to protect against certain kinds of disasters, but if the individuals that we are trying to reduce those risks are not thriving, I'm not sure if we've actually moved the needle. And this is one way that I think Howard and the impact rate of return really helps us and helps give you all that kind of insight on allocations.
Another really pertinent piece that is certainly a more recent technological development are the mobility insights. So this is measuring how people move around literally in real time based on all of our mobile phone data. So tracking anonymously where people are, how they're moving around, how they're interacting with the built environment. And when it comes to natural disaster risk, of course, it's really important to understand where people are that may still need help, where people are more vulnerable, where people tend to congregate before and after a disaster, thus informing in a whole new way and on a whole new level what the total risk is around an area.
Does this also help? I think you explained it to me, but I want to pull this out a little bit further. This gives us some idea where people are having to migrate, right?
Yes,
away
exactly.
from certain levels of disaster to certain levels of security and stability, and therefore what's not just happening in one area of a disaster, but what it means and portends for demands in the larger region. Am I saying that right, Calandra?
That's exactly right. So after Hurricane Katrina or the recent tornadoes in Mississippi, for example, where do people go for shelter in the short term? Where do they go? Where do they relocate to in the longer term? Do they end up coming back to the original region to rebuild? So all of those impacts, when you talk about climate adaptation and so forth, this is one very strategic way that we can measure that.
And that goes also to the point where, let me play off something. It goes to the point where shelter closest to you may either be damaged and need to be retrofitted and upgraded, or, sad but true, there may not be access to those kinds of resources that now need to be designed back in closer to these most vulnerable communities. So you taught me a lot about this, and I just want to share that with others, that this isn't just about transportation routes and all, but this is really some significant insight about why and where people may have to migrate as a result of disasters.
And I think, to your point, Richard, also they may have that infrastructure, but people don't know about it. It hasn't been
Right.
communicated. So that's another whole piece that gets into the economic resilience scorecard that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yep.
So the Resilience Exchange platform, just looking at some of the insights that can be gained from it, and how it can be used for unlocking that intelligence and strategic insights and being able to have real-time informed decision making. Go ahead. And I think this is a really important piece, which is that if any of you all who are seeing this have a wish list of data that you would want us to integrate for your own decision making, or have data to contribute to the platform, feel free to reach out to us, because we want to hear from you. We're starting to convene these different partnerships across public and private entities that can contribute data to the platform. And then also, you know, obviously organizations that want to subscribe and be able to use it.
And I know that some of the folks that are on with us or will be listening to the recorded version of this have expressed interest of determining how to take some of their modeling data and figuring out, you know, without losing control of their intellectual property and their capabilities. But I know that there are different sources of modeling that you and I both have had a chance to talk about. And there's a way to make those, like you said, the APIs and the connections work technically, which we can, you know, obviously talk with each team offline. But I wanted to raise that point about the modeling piece. But the other part is to something you just said, and that is, what do people need to see? How can, you know, how can this be made even more informative based on individual company or individual organization or community interest?
Yeah, and I think that point about being able to spin up custom insights for specific dedicated logged in users, and or be able to spin up those custom insights, visualized or raw data, either way, and license that to be built into their own proprietary solutions. Either way, we can deliver those insights. So go ahead. One example of another partner that we've brought in is Leadership Connect, and their platform for being able to connect with the right decision makers at the federal level and be able to really understand who you need to be connected with in order to carry those relationships forward for all of the various federal legislation and programs and grants and so forth that are available for doing this work. And I know Juniper Thren with Leadership Connect is on with us today. So if you have any questions for her, you can certainly put those in the chat or ask at the end. Richard, anything else to add about Leadership Connect?
Yeah, I think this was something that I have found and reflected on and heard from a lot of others. There's so many different grants and contracts and resources moving, not just at the federal level, but as many of you know, when a large sum of resources like this are deployed, it often leaves Washington, D.C. and goes to a state, a county, you know, a city, a university, whomever. It's often really, really hard to figure out who is making the decisions, who you need to get in touch with, who may be a strategic partner. And so knowing Leadership Connect, and especially knowing Juniper in her prior work with the International City County Managers Association, we determined that this would be something additive to the platform, and that is to help you find who you need to be in touch with, who you need to connect with for resilience. One of the other challenges is somebody that was there in January may not be there in May. Now we got to figure out who to contact. This is a constant update and maintenance of who you need to be in touch with and what is their role in that decision making.
Yeah, you can go ahead. So I guess maybe this would be a good point to pause and do a live demo and then come back to the scorecard, or how
Yeah.
would you like to do
Yeah,
that?
let's do that. Let me, I'm
Okay.
gonna stop sharing on my screen and make sure that you now can go live with yours. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So this is the Statebook platform, just as an introduction to some of the different data and resources that we have aggregated here, just as background for what we do. And why I'm showing you the Statebook platform just for a moment is because the important thing about the Statebook platform is that you can search, filter, and compare communities and get down to a short list of locations that match all of your different criteria. So for this particular view, we're looking at the county level data. I did a search and filter for communities that have experienced 2%, well, the most important one here, just because we're talking about community disaster resilience zones, which haven't yet been named. So I've done a quick example for opportunity zones. We're looking at all of the counties that have at least one opportunity zone and have experienced 2% growth, 3% growth, 2% growth in population, 3% growth in median household income, and 5% growth in median gross rent, just to show you how quick and easy it is with a few clicks to get down to a short list of locations. And once we are working with the community disaster resilience zones, you'll be able to do those same kinds of searches and filters to identify which communities at the census tract level are at most risk for natural disasters and most in need or disadvantaged. So just a quick note on that. And then I pulled up, Richard, your hometown here in Houston to just show the interactive nature of this data. So if we're looking here at the census tract or want to zoom into the block group level and be able to see the information for any of these different views that we have: total population, median age, household income, rents, how many people have a bachelor's degree. You can literally just flip between them to see how each of these different census tracts rank. And you can see, and this is all functionality that is in the Resilience Exchange as well. So you can see how communities are, for example, population is growing in an area, or you may want more context to see how this region is growing compared to state and national averages, or you just may want to see it in a table and be able to get all of the information that you need. And all of these, both here in this platform and in the Resilience Data Exchange, are being built out so that any of these views, including the maps, tables, charts, and graphs, can be downloaded and added to a report, which is a really handy feature. And so just to show you some of the data that we have aggregated in, well, actually just sticking with Houston for a moment, I'll show you that we have all of the demographics data, all of the education data. This is the foundational data that's being built into the Resilient Data Exchange. All of the industries, workforce, occupations, unemployment, producer price index, taxes, transportation, utilities, health data, pollution data, lifestyle data, as well as our partner data. So then if we jump to the Resilience Data Exchange, we've built in the FEMA National Risk Index data. So here, this is looking at Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. So here, if we look at this, you can see all of the different data attributes that are pulled in for the National Risk Index to be able to examine very quickly the building value of the area, the agricultural area, how much square miles there are, what is the national risk index for this region, and the expected annual losses across different factors, the social vulnerability, which is so intrinsic to these models, and the community resilience. And so this is all built into the system already. And then if you want to see it on the map, you can go here and measure on the map the national risk index, or now we're looking at DeSoto County, Mississippi, which is one of the counties that was just recently hit with some of those tornadoes. And so here you can look at the risk index at the census tract level, as well as, you know, dive into, okay, here's the risk for riverine flooding, for example, or the risk for tornadoes in the region. And so you can see where those corridors are that are most at risk and areas that are maybe a little bit safer, right? So, and this is just looking at the population impact, but you can look at agricultural, the number of events, annualized frequency, the buildings, the total rating, expected annual loss scores or hazard risk indexes, agriculture, et cetera. So there is a tremendous amount of information by each, you know, sort of broken out by each type of natural disaster incidents that could happen in an area.
Can you show the community real quick? Can you show the community resilience in your categories? I'm curious to play off of something.
Sure. This is the community resilience here.
Yep.
This is generally considered very low across this region. So
right. I want to point that out to you all to
social.
remember this picture and that level of purple, because we're going to come back to this particular
Yes.
community in a very recent experience that that we've had.
Yes, exactly. And then further adding to that, we added the climate and economic justice screening tool. So here you can look at, I pulled up the percent of individuals 200% below the federal poverty line as an example. And you can look at all different categories here. So diversity, age, how disadvantaged the community is, poverty, the national risk index, pollution, transportation, housing, water pollution, health. So this is all of the different disadvantaged sort of ratings. And then for each one, there is a number of different sub-scores. And as you hover over each of these, you can see, you know, those values changing. And you can also kind of pull out different rankings if you want to see who has what ranking one by one. So
this
there's all
really
kinds
gives
of
us
data here.
really gives us insight on where the targeted social vulnerability side of the most at risk, most in need are aligning, so that based on a census tract or a grouping of census tracts, because as some of you may be aware, a census tract you know, is anywhere from 1,500 to 8,000 individuals. I think what FEMA, White House, congressional intent around the CEDARS program is to not look just at one census tract, but maybe an aggregate of census tracts. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30,000 individuals that will be impacted. This is giving us now a lot of capability of targeting specifically where the greatest of the vulnerabilities are for different types of disasters. And then what can we do to help the community thrive, not just survive future disasters?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think in sort of thinking some of this through, it's important to understand some of the other capabilities. This is a very rural community, so this may not be a very good example, but you can dive into, you know, each area and look at it do those 3D flyovers of the region, change to satellite view. I mean, the capabilities of the tool itself are kind of endless. So there is just an extraordinary amount of flexibility in how you get your view and what you can see with it. I want to switch for a second to our other partners. So looking at, for example, impact potential score and the data that we have for that, this is also at the census tract level. So if we zoom in here, you can see the different census tracts and the rankings for the total impact potential, or how far your investment can go when investing in an area. And so each census tract gets their own score based on the total impact that is available to be achieved through investment. And then you can look at the sub-scores for each area, comparing the types of impact that could be had across affordable housing or unemployment, poverty, diversity, access to healthcare or education, et cetera. And then that climate alpha data with the climate risk indexes, and looking at that data at the county or zip code level. And then they have built in, as we stated earlier, the different types of risks that a community may face, and then those different optimistic, business as usual, and pessimistic scenarios, as well as not just the risk, but also the community's readiness or preparedness to be able to withstand those types of risks based on their public spending across different categories that impact their preparedness, and then their vulnerability against things like poverty and inequality, infrastructure, urban porosity, the age of the built environment, and the population density, how many people will be impacted. And finally, we can look quickly at the mobility data, which is aggregated from the cell phones. This is an example, just a snapshot in time of an example of how people were moving around this particular region. And you can see very clearly here was COVID lockdown, right? Nobody went out during this period. And then things started opening up. And you can look at this for different dwell times, how long they spend while they're out and about. Are they just running to the bank or the gas station? Are they, going to the grocery store or the gym for 1 to 3 hours? Are they going to work for 6 hours or more? So different types of insights there. And again, whoops, user error. Again, you can see this data, in this case, again, down to the census tract and block group level. And it's very interesting to kind of watch this animate over time to see how people's movement around an area changes month over month, year over year, depending on different circumstances, events, et cetera.
So if you ran this against the 5 or 6 major parishes, including New Orleans, you would have seen this outmigration and the slow reattraction post recovery. And I think that's something that's important for us to see, especially on coast, where there's this potential outmigration from coast, which are going to change certain demand for other communities that are going to absorb this type of outmigration. So this is not just the idea of looking at that specific track or census, but to also begin to get a little bit of a broader context for what the ripple effect of the impacts may be on a larger economic scenario.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think to that point, one of the data sets that we're in the process of integrating right now is the real estate transaction data, ownership and transaction data, how long properties are on the market, what the value is, what the types of mortgages they have are, and we're integrating that into Statebook. Climate Alpha also has a forecast for building valuations based on the natural disaster risk scenarios. So that's another key piece of that. So Richard, is there anything else you want me to cover in this live demo part, or should we go back to the deck and then leave a few minutes for questions?
Well, let me do this. We'll wrap up on the scorecard in a minute, but I want to make sure that those who have joined us, if there are any questions, I can also, make an individual live if they've got a question. But if somebody wants to see something in the live format, we can put it up. Or as Calandra and I have said, we both, and more importantly, Calandra, are always available to do a separate, demo in conversation with any of you and your teams and organizations to talk a little bit more offline. But are there anybody got a question that they want to throw into the chat area? Or figure out how to raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to keep on going. Oh, here we go. Tina, who is also one of the smarter people that I have just briefly gotten introduced to, working with the Federal Reserve. So Tina, I'm interested to know how many and what types of users are accessing these platforms. You want to address that, and I can respond right after that. Thank you,
Sure.
Tina, for the question.
Yeah, thank you. So with Statebook in general, our core audience started with corporate site selectors and working with Fortune 500 companies, as well as with the U.S. Department of Commerce, specifically Select USA, which uses our data at their 34 locations across the world, bringing foreign direct investment into the U.S. And we work with hundreds of economic development organizations all across the U.S. In sort of evolving our data in recent years, and also expanding from our own subscription platform to APIs and licensing our data to other companies, we now work with other prop tech, fintech, gov tech, health tech, insure tech kind of companies, climate tech. And then we also can spin up separate custom solutions for different types of customers, and pull in any kind of combinations of data. And that's where I think what Richard and I are building is really critical. And we're working with a number of different groups across insurance agencies, banks, corporations, and government agencies to kind of bring all of those ecosystems together and deliver solutions that really make sense and kind of make all of that data-driven decision making much more efficient.
Tina, to this point, and to all of you, the great part about collaborating and partnering with Calandra is there are significant amount of users. The way a license works is it goes to one organization, and multiple people are leveraging the platform. As it relates to this increased focus on resilience, that's the reason why we've really put our brains together and are sharing this with you and others, because being able to sharpen this data for a very specific look, the infrastructure bill, y'all, I stopped counting at 78 the number of times the word resilience was in the infrastructure bill. So it's kind of an overused word, but it has, meaning to it. And so part of this, Tina and all, is to work with you and others on expanding the reach as these community disaster resilient zones get designated in other types of investments. Tina wanted me to clarify that she is not paid by the Federal Reserve, but the partnership that she and the team at the Impact Finance Center, which we really would like to collaborate, Tina, with you and the team, because part of this is an outcome leading to identifying different types of capital stacks, public, private, philanthropic, insurance, mortgage, different ways that we can unleash capital around these. So I want to clarify, because for purposes of making sure that the university doesn't call Tina up and go, thank you, we're taking you off our payroll and putting you back on the Federal Reserve. I wanted to make sure that I didn't say it wrong, but the work that the center does, Tina, as you know, and others should get to know, is really critical for some of the next steps. Any other quick questions? And then I want to wrap up on one other part. Well, look, I'm going to take this back and pull up this slide to end it on, and that is that one of the other tools in the toolkit is this resilience scorecard that Statebook and actually one of our innovators in residence, David Dodd, have generated. And I'm going to give you a real-time example. 2 Fridays ago, Calandra was giving a presentation of the scorecard. The scorecard essentially helps a location, a community, to really ask some hard questions of themselves to determine how really resilient they are. What are the actions? What are the investments? What's the resources? What's the impact on individuals on this idea of thriving versus surviving? And I'm going to tell the story, Calandra, very quickly, but connect the dots here. So Calandra made this presentation to this particular community, and frankly, their score for their resilience readiness was very low. Within 36 to 48 hours, that community got hit by a major tornado. And it helped put a fine point to that one of the reasons why the scorecard is a part of this package is to help communities really, really assess where they are right now. And then by taking all of this data, working on these types of interventions, these new types of fortifying their homes, strengthening or future-proofing their community, and helping their citizens, how can they track over time their improvement? And we think that the scorecard addresses something that Congress, the White House, federal agencies, taxpayers want to know. And that is that by taking these types of measures, by taking these types of investment activities, are we actually changing our ability to be resilient as a nation and as communities? So what we wanted to let you know about the scorecard is that it's a part of what we believe should be kind of the technical assistance role in all of this. Measure where you are right now. Look at the types of interventions and allocations you're going to make to see what are those scenarios, and then measure over time and report out. Publicly report out, be very transparent about it. We're making progress in these things and others we're not. And that, we believe, is a way for the communities as a whole to engage together to make these types of enhancements and improvements to their levels of resilience, as well as, frankly, for the disaster and social vulnerability to be measured collectively as a joint outcome, a joint project. I want to raise one other part before we close out, Calandra. You know, one of the other data sets and one of the other parts of this that we're beginning to talk about is how do we measure taxpayer impact and taxpayer benefit? The true belief on this is that if we are truly making the right kinds of decisions for retrofitting, upgrading, designing, delivering new types of communities and helping citizens and companies thrive, then there will be a reduction in future demand for all of these major presidential multi-billion-dollar declarations to be done. That in turn will say to taxpayers that we truly are trying to reduce the amount of having to constantly rebuild. And I think any taxpayer would appreciate that, whatever end of the political spectrum. And at the same time, what we're also looking at in this type of economic or fiscal consequence is the way to also take a look at how those reductions in future loss claims can be monetized to create new types of bonds and new types of investment products to continue to invest further in the resilience of the most vulnerable locations in this country. So we wanted you to know that this is kind of a complete package of going from a scorecard at the beginning all the way to the end, as well as from the opportunity to connect the dots. Calandra can always be contacted, or I can, through her phone number and calandra@statebook.com. And then we will upload the recording and all of our materials to our various communications tools that are made available to anybody to continue to work with us and collaborate with us. I think we have hopefully given you all something to think about and something for us to continue to work on together. And with that, we'll give you the rest of the balance of your day and look forward to continuing to do future proofing in collaboration with each of you and your communities and your organization. So Calandra, cannot thank you enough. You're so great to work with, and I am pumped to have a partner that's as enthusiastic and frankly a hell of a lot smarter than I am on making this happen. So Calandra, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's a pleasure.
Everybody have a great day, and we'll all talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.